You've probably heard it said that Numbers 32:23 says, "Be sure your sin will find you out." Whenever I first heard that, I heard it. The first time I heard it was actually applied when during a Bible study on 2 Samuel 11 and 12, which talked about where that was where David had taken Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah, had laid with her, had relations with her, caused her to become pregnant, and then after he tried to send Uriah home, and Uriah would not go home to his wife, because basically David wanted Uriah to be intimate with his wife, so it would appear to be Uriah's child. After that is where David had, that was where he had arranged for the murder of Uriah by sending him into the hottest battle, or having him sent into the hottest battle by Joab, his commander, and then having Joab withdraw the army so he would be struck down and killed by the enemy. Now, of course, the Lord was displeased, and he sends, and the Lord speaks through Nathan the prophet. He sends Nathan the prophet to David and rebukes him. And I heard a pastor use this passage and say, Numbers 32:23 says, "Be sure your sin will find you out," and applied it there. In other words, to kind of applying it to David's situation. I've also heard this used even more recently. It was a few years back when, and I think there's been even more that's come out, but it was when something had come out about Joshua, I don't know if you say Duggar or Duggar, that, he's one of the that very large family. I think was it 18 siblings or something? And there were things that came out about him, about sexual sin. And I saw somebody use this verse talking about that. Actually, first of all, when you read Numbers 32:23, that's actually the last part of the verse. That's not even the whole verse. But there's even more than that. When you read this verse in context of the whole chapter of Numbers 32, what you'll see is that this was directed at a very specific audience and was referring to a very specific sin. Now, as I'm going to discuss it closer to the end of this video, I do not think that means that, in other words, even though that's the case, even though this phrase, this part of a verse, plainly was not written originally as some sort of universal principle, but written specifically to as we're going to see, two groups of Israelites, the Gadites, some of the Gadites and the Reubenites. I'm saying some of, because I think it was like half of the tribes settled. I thought it was like half of the tribes settled east of the Jordan, the other half west, but I want to be careful. So I don't want to, I'd have to get back and review that. But anyway, it's speaking to a specific audience, not to every person across the face of the earth. It isn't, it's not like in the book of Proverbs, which is, which you read a lot of those, plainly it's directed at anyone. It's a universal thing, or even, a lot was written in the book of Psalms. But also understand too that much of what's written in the New Testament, much of what Jesus said to his disciples, much of what Paul wrote to, Paul and Peter and John and James wrote, that it really applies to all believers. We understand that. But in this passage, based on the context of where it says, "Be sure your sin will find you out," it can't be said that this is a universal principle here. So to be applying this as a universal or to say, in other words, as I'm going to discuss, do I think Do I think that in other words, do I think that sin will find you out? I think oftentimes it will. Even in an earthly sense, I think oftentimes it will. I believe I've seen it happen. But just because I've seen it happen does not mean this verse is meant to be a universal principle. In context, it's plainly not. In context, it's referring to it's directed at a very specific audience and referring to a very specific sin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read Numbers 32 verses 1 to 23 so that you see the whole context where this is used. Now, the historical background that leading up to this is where Moses was leading the children of Israel to the promised land. Now, it seems at this point that the first generation has already died off. They has basically already died off, as we're going to see. The first generation's they've already passed away. Because what happened was in Numbers 13 into 14, what we see is what happened was they had, so it says the Lord spoke to Moses saying, so Numbers 13:1, and to send men out to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am given to the people of Israel. From every tribe of the fathers you shall send a man, every one a chief among them. So that's where he sent them from the wilderness of Paran. So they went into the land of Canaan. There were 12 spies that went out. Then what happened was in Numbers 13:25 to 33 is where we see the report that gets brought back. And this is what it says. At the end of 40 days, they returned from spying out the land. And they came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told them, we came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. However, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the Negeb. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the hill country, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan. But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and occupy, for we are well able to overcome it. Then the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone to spy out, it is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people that we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim, and we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. Now in response, the congregation lets out a cry, and then they said, would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in the wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into a land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. Would it not have been better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to one another, let us choose a leader to go back to Egypt. So what happened was this bad report inspired unbelief amongst the people. The Lord had promised to deliver this land to them. But now they have unbelief. But also, they're rebelling now. The Lord had said, you shall not go back to Egypt. You shall not go back. But that's what they want to do. Now, of course, this was foolish because what was it like in Egypt? They were in bondage. They were in slavery. But they're saying, we want to go back there. We'd rather be back there. Would it not be better to go there? You know, I mean, this is rebellion. And then what we see is that Joshua, the son of Nun, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, So so there were 10 bad spies who brought back this bad report. Now, Caleb's already mentioned what he said, but it was actually, there were 2 good spies. It was Joshua and Caleb. And this is where they tried to reason with the congregation. They said, the land which we passed through spied out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into the land and give it to us, a land that flows milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their protection is removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. Then all the congregation said to stone them with stones. But the glory of the Lord appeared in the tent of meeting to all the people of Israel. And then here the Lord comes to Moses, and he says, how long are the people going to despise me? He also basically says, you know what? I'm gonna strike them with pestilence. I'm gonna disinherit them. And Moses, I'll make you a nation greater and mightier. And that's when Moses pleads, don't destroy them. The Egyptians will hear about it. So the Lord relents from bringing the severe judgment that he was that he was ready to bring, that he was saying to Moses he was going to bring, but there would still be a penalty. And it was this. Of that generation that rebelled, what would happen is that all of them 20 years and older, except for Joshua and Caleb, except for those 2 men, all that generation, 20 years and up, would die in the wilderness. They would never enter the promised land. And indeed they did. They all died. And there was an immediate judgment on the 10 spies that brought back the evil report. There was an immediate judgment. It says that they died by a plague. And I'm sure probably that the reason why there was this immediate judgment on them is ultimately they were the ones, the people were responsible for their own sin. They were responsible for the rebellion, for their unbelief, but these men inspired it. These men were the ones who inspired it. So of course it would seem they have a greater culpability here. So they were judged. So it's important to have that backdrop because because when I read Numbers 32, then it'll make sense what Moses is referring to. So this is what had happened about 40 years before the events of Numbers 32 is that we had seen this occur, where most of the people, that first generation, they died in the wilderness due to their unbelief, to the rebellion against the Lord. Except for Joshua and Caleb. They're the only 2. Now, ultimately, we know the first generation, we know a little later. Actually, we know from Numbers 20 that Moses was not going to enter the promised land either because of his error at Kadesh, because he had disobeyed the Lord there. Miriam had already died. Aaron had already died. So even Moses, Aaron, and Miriam would not inherit. They wouldn't even enter the promised land. And Moses would be granted to see the promised land, but he would never walk into it. Joshua would be the one that would lead him into it. So anyway, getting back to the point. But here is the original context. I'm going to read, but with that historical backdrop given. Now, of course, after these people died off, then they started to move forward again, and the Lord had brought defeat to. There were a couple kings on east of the Jordan where the Lord had brought defeat. Now, here's the thing. They were not supposed to settle down east of the Jordan. They were supposed to settle west of the Jordan. They were supposed to cross over the Jordan River and settle west of the Jordan River. And with that given, here's Numbers 32, which says this. Now, the people of Reuben and the people of Gad had a very great number of livestock. And they saw the land of Jazer and the land of Gilead, and behold, the land was a place for livestock. So the people of Gad and the people of Reuben came up and said to Moses and to Eleazar the priest and to the chiefs of the congregation, Ataroth, Dibon, Jazer, Nimrah, Heshbon, Eliela, Sebam, Nebo, and Beon. The land that the Lord struck down before the congregation of Israel is a land of livestock, and your servants have livestock. And they said, if we have found favor in your sight, let this land be given to your servants for a possession. Do not take us across the Jordan. But Moses said to the people of Gad and to the people of Reuben, shall your brothers go to the war while you sit here? Why will you discourage the heart of the people of Israel from going over to the land which the Lord has given them? Your fathers did this when I sent them from Kadesh Barnea to see the land. For when they went up to the valley of Eshcol and saw the land, they discouraged the heart of the people of Israel from going into the land that the Lord had given them. And the Lord's anger was kindled on that day, and he swore, saying, surely none of the men who came up out of Egypt from 20 years old and upward shall see the land that I swore to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, because they have not wholly followed me. None except Caleb the son of Jephunneh the Kenizzite and Joshua the son of Nun, for they have wholly followed the Lord. And the Lord's anger was kindled against Israel, and he made them wander in the wilderness 40 years, until all the generation that had done evil in the sight of the Lord was gone. And behold, you have risen in your father's place, a brood of sinful men, to increase still the more the fierce anger of the Lord against Israel. For if you turn away from following him, he will again abandon them in the wilderness, and you will destroy all this people. Then they came near to him. So they, being it would be the Gadites and the Reubenites, came near to Moses, said, we will build sheepfolds here for our livestock and cities for our little ones. But we will take up arms, ready to go before the people of Israel, until we have brought them to their place. And our little ones shall live in the fortified cities because of the inhabitants of the land. We will not return to our homes until each of the people of Israel has gained his inheritance. For we will not inherit with them on the other side of the Jordan and beyond, because our inheritance has come to us on this side of the Jordan to the east. So Moses said to them, if you will do this, if you will take up arms to go before the Lord for the war, and every armed man of you will pass over the Jordan before the Lord, until he has driven out his enemies before him, and the land is subdued before the Lord, then after that you shall return and be free of obligation to the Lord and to Israel, and this land shall be your possession before the Lord. Here it comes. But if you will not do so, behold, you have sinned against the Lord, and be sure your sin will find you out. So, when we look at the context of that passage, there is a very specific audience, and that is found in Numbers 32, verse 1, the people of Reuben and the people of Gad. It is not directed to all people across all time. The you is referring specifically to the people of Reuben and the people of Gad. And what is the sin that will find them out? The sin would be if, they had promised saying, they had promised saying that, we're going to build our sheepfolds here. We're going to settle down here in the land, but we're going to build our sheepfolds, and we're going to build cities for little ones. So we're going to build sheepfolds for livestock, build cities for little ones. But our men, the men who can fight, our men of war, we're going to cross over the Jordan with the rest of Israel. We're going to fight with them until they've gained their inheritance. Okay, and then we'll cross back over the Jordan, and then they would then possess. They would then settle down. Basically, is what they're saying, and that's where Moses says, okay, he's saying on that condition, if you do that, then you know what? If you want to settle down here east of the Jordan, and you go over and you fight with your brethren until they've gained their possession, and then you come back, at that point you're free of your obligation before the Lord and to Israel. But if you don't do that thing that you promised, that you said you were going to do, if you don't do that, or actually, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say it's the sin is not, it's not just the fact that they promised to do this, it would just flat out be if they didn't go over and fight with them. If they just stayed there and didn't cross the Jordan, didn't fight with the brethren, that would be sin against the Lord. And Moses is saying, look, if you do this, that sin's going to find you out. That is the proper context of this passage. So, for us to go around and use this passage as some sort of proverb or some sort of principle that applies to all sins, I just don't see that as being valid. Now, do I believe that let's say that you wanted to try to make a principle out of this verse. I do believe that, based on what I've seen, that oftentimes it does work. Things do work out that way, especially when it comes to sexual sin. Honestly, I don't know if there's anybody that ever gets away with adultery, and I don't just mean in an eternal sense. No one will get away with sin in an eternal sense. No one will. God sees all things that we do, and we have to give an account before Him. Every man's got to give an account before the Lord. But I believe that, it seems like that I guess just the way that God upholds things, or just because of the natural consequences of certain sins, that many times, that even in an earthly sense, oftentimes we will not get away with sin. Our sin will find us out, in the sense of it'll end up coming to light. It could just be our conscience is really, I read a commentary from John Gill, and he mentioned about the idea of the conscience. The idea that it gets found up by our conscience, and we just don't really get away with it. It might be that nobody ever knows about it, but we still face consequences. It finds us out, in that sense. But I guess it especially seems like with sexual sin. I just don't know if anyone ever truly gets away with it, even in an earthly context, especially adultery. Because even if no one finds out while you're alive, how many times do we I like to watch, especially when I'm visiting my parents. I don't really watch TV on my own, but when I visit my parents, my mom and I like to watch crime shows. We're big on investigation. I just like seeing how investigations work. But so often in real life, so many crimes. When you drill down, you find out that people were living a double life. They were cheating on they were committing adultery. And even if you're never caught while you're alive, it could very well be the murder victim that it comes to light after the murder. It's like, so I do think, in a sense, that there are sins, especially if it's a continual, if it's a continual unrepentant sin, especially something like adultery, or something like embezzlement, like police corruption, that just the way that, that God upholds things, that you truly will be found out. It will be exposed on this side of eternity. So I certainly, although that principle, based on what I've read and based on the context, although I firmly believe that taking that and applying that verse, taking that outside of the context, the historical context, Numbers 23, and then applying it to everything, although I do not believe that to be valid, I still think, though, that ultimately things do tend to work out that way. And actually, in a way, I thank the Lord for that, because there are things that I know those things I've done, and no, it has not been theft, it hasn't been adultery, but there was a particular thing I had done that I wasn't proud of, and I was actually, and I had confessed it before the Lord, and I had repented of it before Him, but the person against whom I had done it, I was trying to hide it from them. But things worked out to where I had to confess it. But once I did it, I felt free. And actually things got, and actually there was healing that took place. So it was actually better that it did come to light. It was better. It's better that, because the longer and longer I continued to hide it from this other person, and actually I'll just say what it was. Basically, I had pursued somebody. I had pursued a woman, and I shouldn't have pursued her because she had not reciprocated any interest. But I had been deceptive about, and what it was, I had moved to be closer to her, but I was deceptive about why I was moving to be closer to her. Now, I had repented of doing all that, but I just thought, okay, I just won't ever tell her I did that. Well, things came forward to where I was forced to tell her. And initially, it was a little bit terse, but actually, we're better off now. And I feel way more peace now that it's out in the open. And I'm actually thanking God that, I always want to be careful about saying that God maybe did something, if maybe it was just, I'd like to think the Lord did that, but I was thanking God either way it came out, because actually things are so much better. No more hiding. So in that sense, I think that yeah, that came out. That did find me out. But if I had said, well, Numbers, that demonstrates Numbers 32:23. No, that's not correct, because Numbers 32:23 is talking about a specific sin. And it's warning that if they did this specific sin, that sin would find them out. So I hope this is helpful.